I am so excited to be continuing our special series of homeschooling to college with my good friend Kim Kent, who is a homeschooling mom of six students, four of whom are already out of homeschool high school, off into
Mhm.
college and career. She is currently homeschooling her younger two, including Samuel, who's currently a senior in homeschooled high school and going through the college admissions process now. Kim is also the
Mhm.
founder of Extend Homeschool Tutorial, a robust homeschool program with academic materials and classes for homeschoolers in Maryland and a frequent writer for us at the Foundation for Economic Education.
Mhm.
So, Kim, it has been so fun to have you on this series with me talking
Wow.
about homeschooling to college as we're both going through this
Yeah.
process
Yeah.
with seniors. My daughter Molly has
Yes.
also always been homeschooled, like your son Samuel and your others, and she is also going
Hmm.
through the college application admissions process this
Hmm.
year.
Hmm.
So if viewers and listeners have not already looked at episodes 1 and 2 in this series, strongly recommend you go ahead and do
Yes.
that. In episode 1, Kim and I talked about the pre-application process
Hmm.
and sort of high school preparation if college is on the horizon for
Hmm.
you as a homeschooling family and why you should consider continuing to homeschool beyond eighth grade into high school,
Yes.
that college is possible, and certainly we've had a lot of success with it
Yeah.
so far, as you've heard in those initial episodes. And then
Hmm.
episode 2, we talked about common myths around the
Hmm.
college admissions process, including the application process and
Hmm.
affordability. Kim
Hmm.
was kind enough to take us through the Common App, the prominent portal that many students
Yes.
apply to college on using Samuel's
Yeah.
profile. And so just
Hmm.
great to see that. And some of the other myths that we talked about in episode
Yeah.
2 included one that Kim shared about don't
Mhm.
take no for an answer.
That's
And
right.
she shared in that conversation
Hmm.
about how she had some issues with
Hmm.
Samuel's homeschool transcript coming in a couple of days
Yeah.
after the deadline for the Ohio
Right.
State University and how they
Hmm.
reached out to the college
Hmm.
to make sure that that transcript could be accepted. And
Yes.
sure enough,
Sure enough.
Samuel was. Kim,
He
tell
was
us.
accepted. He was actually accepted into I love it, the Ohio State University. And actually just recently received scholarship money, received a merit scholarship from them as well. So they are definitely well in the running. We will be visiting. I'm thinking of all of the college visits that are bound to happen over spring break. But we're excited that, yes, that no doesn't necessarily mean no. There's so much power when you go ahead and you call them up and you ask questions and you push a little bit. There's no harm in doing that because the worst that they can say is no, and you're no worse off. But there's always a possibility that you'll get a yes, and that will take you further in your journey. So we are so happy to say that he is now admitted there at the Ohio State. That is one of those
Amazing.
that's on his list. So we're gonna continue
Yeah.
that as well.
And I think it also
Yeah.
speaks to just how dynamic this college admissions
Mhm.
process is. Kim and I
Absolutely.
are recording these episodes in real
Hmm.
time as our children have kind of gone through the application process and are getting their
Yeah.
admissions decisions.
Yeah.
So you're all along for the ride with us, which is exciting
Hmm.
and which is really why we wanted to do this series. And we're
Yeah.
just so thrilled for this now third episode to have with us a very special guest, Rebecca Stewart Orlowski, who is a professional college admissions counselor who's worked with students and families on the college admissions process. Also homeschooled for 25 years, sent her three children off to college. So comes at this from both personal and professional experience. And she'll be with us today to share a little bit more on some insights, advice, ideas for homeschooling students and families as they prepare to apply to college and go through that kind of senior year process, which is, as Kim and I have said, is quite different from anything we
Hmm.
experienced decades ago when we were applying to college. So it's great to have Rebecca with
Yeah.
us today. And then our fourth and final podcast episode in this homeschooling to college series will feature our very special guests, Samuel and Molly,
Yeah.
talking about what they felt
Yeah.
was interesting about their college admissions process as
Hmm.
homeschoolers, and they'll share with us where they are at in the college
Hmm.
admissions process, kind of finalizing their decisions and where they'll
Hmm.
end up going come fall. So look
Hmm.
forward to that one after
Yeah.
this. But today, again, thrilled to have Rebecca with us. I'll just read a little bit about her for those of you listening and watching. So Rebecca Stewart Orlowski, again, is an independent college admissions counselor. She's based in Southern California, working with students and families on the college admissions process. As I mentioned, she homeschooled for many years and has kind of gone through this college admissions process with her own children. She also has a bachelor's degree from San Diego State University, earned two teaching credentials, and taught in various schools and educational settings with a focus on students with special learning needs. Rebecca received a specialized college counseling certificate from the University of California at San Diego in 2018 and has been running Orlowski College Consulting for more than a decade, working closely with students on their college application journeys, with a particular focus on homeschooled students and others from non-traditional educational backgrounds. Rebecca has multiple professional organization associations, including being a member of the Independent Educational Consultants Association, the National Association for College Admissions Counseling, NACAC, the Western Association for College Admissions Counseling, WACAC, and the California Homeschool Network. So, Rebecca Stewart Orlowski, welcome to the Liberated Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so fun to be here. And I have to say, just I loved I loved Kim's story of how Samuel basically got admitted to the Ohio State. It's kind of my main focus, not just on homeschool students, but all of my students is communication. So my degree was in communicative disorders. I wanted to be an actress and then a dancer, and so my whole life has been filled with communication, and it is so critical, and particularly for homeschoolers, as you too. Like, I watched your other episodes, and it's been really fun to listen, and as you guys went through the process. But you've learned that communication is so critical because it provides the context, the necessary context to colleges, particularly for homeschoolers, because you're not coming from a school that has a set profile, set transcripts, or anything like that. So, I applaud Kim for, sending that message out to your audience. Communication is key to success.
So great. Yeah. So, Rebecca, tell us a little bit more about how you got into this work of college admissions consulting and counseling. It seems like the perfect career as someone who was a former teacher and then a longtime homeschooler who sent your own children to college and then decided to kind of approach this process from a professional side with your own consulting practice. Tell us a little bit more about that journey for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit hilarious because I certainly didn't set out to work full time as an independent educational consultant, right? That was not my goal. But yeah, as you mentioned, I homeschooled my three kids I would say, I think it was probably during my eldest son's like high school years. I was working for what's called a PSP. It's a private satellite program. Basically, here in California, it's an overarching organization that supports homeschooled students. And so I was helping homeschool students with educational planning. And then my eldest son went through the process, and we actually got support pro bono, which was really amazing. I won't tell you the whole story, but we got pro bono support for my eldest son. And, he was fortunately admitted to every college that he applied to. And because he was sort of maybe STEM focused, homeschool focused, the immediate year after he went through the application process, I had a friend and she and I bartered. I helped her daughter through the admissions process and she tutored my middle son in language arts. So that literally is how it got started. And I think word just spread. So long before I thought of myself as a business person, long before I even had a college counseling certificate, I was sort of off and running, a business. And then later, I added professional organizations and things like that. But I think, through a particular, like a number of networks that I'm involved in, word just spread. So, I run my business probably 99% word of mouth, just
Mhm.
by being out in homeschool circles and other specific circles of people who recognize, the need for, for this kind of support. So it's been a wonderful journey.
And I know
Yeah.
Kim is going to jump in just a minute, but
Yes.
Rebecca, I'd love for you to just share a little bit about your own children's college journeys,
Yeah,
and then also why I think a big part of your practice is focused on finding the right college fit
right.
for the students and families that you work with. Maybe you could share a bit about that.
Yeah, so I feel like between my three sons, we've covered pretty much every type of student. So my eldest was very a joyful learner and he was accelerated. That's kind of why I came into homeschooling, actually. So, as an ex-public school teacher, special ed teacher, I knew that he wouldn't fit in. So he was doing like algebra in second grade, but he also couldn't sit still, right? So like what school is going to know what to do with a kid like that? So, I decided to homeschool when he was 4 because there was somebody in our church that homeschooled. I'm like, okay, that's it. One person, that's all I needed to do. And here in California, we have a lot of freedom and flexibility. So I call our method sort of self-directed learning. And then, we just followed his love. So he was super accelerated in math and physics, and he loved reading and writing. Like everything was a joy. So he went to MIT, and, graduated from MIT and worked in the, STEM world. And he's still working in the, kind of in the tech world, but he's also going to seminary. So, yeah, he's had an interesting journey. My middle son very much has had a non-linear journey due to multiple learning and health challenges. He was also a joyful learner, but it had to be the right way just because of his learning disabilities. But, he was a musician, like that was his big strength, and he was super creative. So he played the cello, for many years. So he went off to the University of Pennsylvania after a gap year. It was not a good fit. And so he came back home, went to community college for a little bit. Then he transferred again. He was going to be a cello performance major. And then because of health reasons, he came back home again and he transferred a third time where he goes now to San Diego State. He's able to live at home so we can address the health issues. So talking about not taking no, that is his path. Like he is still, forging a way forward, where it seems impossible. It's not. So, that was his journey. And he did really well in admissions, but, ultimately his health, brought him back home. And then my youngest son, was not particularly joyful learner. He did co-op classes, a few community college classes, but he just applied to a few schools. And then in the end, we kind of pivoted to online college. So he actually goes to Regent University online. So he also lives at home. Yeah. And actually it's a little isolating, but the curriculum, it's been a really good fit for him. So I think it's just the right thing for him right now. So when I work with students, I can share my own personal experience from having, a student go to MIT to having a student live, stay at home and go online, and then having a student who's had lots of challenges to keep going forward. So my message is, never give up. I was a 3 college, seven
Love it.
year, I transferred twice, 7 years to my first degree. So like, yeah, I'm all about like whatever you can do. If you want to keep moving forward, there's a way. So.
Yeah, and just
I love
such a
that.
great
I love that.
perspective, Rebecca, too, just about
Mm-hmm.
how even in one family, all of the kids are so different, right? And
Mm-hmm.
we as moms, as homeschool moms, can fully appreciate that, and just being able to find the right college or career path, sort of
Right,
alternative to college path for each of our kids,
right,
is really the goal. So, which is sort of why we went into homeschooling in many cases, so that we
Right.
could really tailor learning for each individual child. So,
and I
again,
remember
so great.
Kim, yeah, Kim
Mm-hmm.
saying, basically, Samuel's journey was like starting over in many ways,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I
Absolutely.
felt with all of my kids.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Kim, jump in.
So
I've been
I yeah, no, no, no. It's
monopolizing this
so good because
conversation.
Rebecca, I'm loving hearing your stories. And one of the things that just right away I was thinking, you're busting a lot of myths, and I am on my end. And I would love to know what are some of the myths that you've encountered as you've been working with families, and how have you been able to navigate them so that they can successfully apply to colleges?
Right. I think the first myth, and maybe you addressed it last time, was
Hmm.
simply that, homeschooling is a disadvantage in college admissions,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
And so, I try to use data for families considering, oh, I'm, scared to, homeschool high school. But, data suggests that there's, literally no difference between,
Hmm.
independent homeschooling with a support network. Like here in California, charter schools are really big. They're public schools, but parents have a little flexibility, or brick and mortar private or public schools, right? There's
Hmm.
just really no difference. So that's what I encourage families, and I have lots of data. I mean, I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of homeschoolers, and there are a few colleges out there, the
Hmm.
UMass Amhersts of the world, that make homeschoolers jump through a few more hoops.
Right.
Which
But
Molly got
by
into, I will say.
There
Yes,
you go. There you go.
It's
So
exactly,
it's not
honors
right.
program.
impossible. It's not
So,
Yes.
yeah.
And
impossible.
I have one of my former students is there. So,
Hmm.
you learn what you need to learn.
Hmm.
You look at admissions, and, again, I go back to communication, right? Any
Hmm.
questions you have, reach out and ask. That's what the admissions folks are there for.
Sure.
So no parent should be scared, that they're putting their kid at a disadvantage just
Hmm.
because they've chosen to homeschool. So that, I would say, that's a big myth.
Right.
Um, Maybe, other myths, involve the social, aspect of, I wrote an
Mm.
article some years ago called Homeschooling, College, and the S Word. And of course, the S word is
Yes.
socialization.
Hmm.
Um,
Big
you
myth.
know,
Big myth.
yeah, right. Big myth, right? It's like, I mean,
Yeah.
the idea that you're home, that might
Hmm.
be a myth because homeschoolers are often not home.
Never home.
They're
We're
in
never home.
co-ops and
Hmm.
working and, taking community college classes. So,
Hmm.
I mean, there are kids, my two younger kids are much
Hmm.
shyer. So
Hmm.
we had to be more intentional. But, the idea
Hmm.
of, sitting with a homogenous group of, students, is the way to be
Hmm.
educated. Like that's a big myth. So
Yeah.
yeah, those are
Yeah.
just two that stand out in my mind.
I love it. I love it. One of the other things I was really interested from your perspective is that what are you seeing in your role as a college prep person, college prep, helper for for homeschoolers? What are you seeing in terms of things that we can be doing? Maybe doing a little bit more to help our students early on. And approximately when should that start? When do you think people should start thinking about college, and what are some of the early things that we can be doing with our kids to make that, a reality?
Right. No, I think that's a great question. I would say, even if parents aren't sure that their kids are college bound,
Mm-hmm.
record keeping is a great thing to start
Mm-hmm.
early. Once they
Yeah.
start doing high school work, if you're an independent homeschooler, it's like here in
Mm-hmm.
California, there's different ways to do it. And I was an independent homeschooler, so that meant I keep my kids' transcripts. So,
Mm-hmm.
beginning to record keeping documentation, keeping course descriptions,
Mm-hmm.
because colleges will want that, or many colleges will. So it can't hurt to document what you guys are doing. It cannot hurt to document the activities that your kids are doing,
Right.
whether that's church related or community service or competitions or work or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. So documenting everything is really helpful. If your kids are taking college classes,
Mm-hmm.
keep
Yes.
hold of syllabi. And here's, I'm going to throw in a couple of extra things. So when my eldest son went off to MIT, we decided to try to get transfer credit from the local community college for some of its
Mm.
classes. And you're thinking,
Yes.
gosh, a place like MIT, are they going to give transfer credit? Well, we had to scramble and we tracked down, they wanted syllabi, they wanted
Mm.
textbooks, they wanted chapters covered in the textbooks. Of course they wanted transcripts, so we dug all that up, and in the end my son got about 20 to 24 credits of transfer of
That's
community college.
fantastic. That's
So
fantastic.
I do tell my parents,
Mm-hmm.
keep all of those things. I had to go on Amazon and take photos of,
Mm-hmm.
textbook and table of contents and stuff like that. But yeah, keep that documentation. And then when does the conversation for college start? When I'm working
Mm-hmm.
with, even anyone, homeschoolers or otherwise, it depends on the student. Like some
Okay.
kids are just reticent. They're like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
not ready to talk about it. My youngest son was not ready until basically summer before senior year. Like, I don't even want to talk about college, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Whereas
That was
some are
Samuel.
super motivated. Like, I'm in ninth grade and I
Mm-hmm.
want to go to this school and I want to major in this, right? So I would
Mm-hmm.
say homeschool parents keep having those conversations.
That's so
There are
helpful.
lots of really fun ways. There are inventories, there are major inventories and career inventories. I use a college
Mm-hmm.
inventory with my students starting in junior year that they
Okay.
fill out. And it just gets them thinking about what am I looking for in a college? And it's great for the whole family to be involved in that, exploration. And I would say the other myth, maybe, and this is not just homeschoolers, but that myth that you have to have everything figured out.
Mm-hmm.
My eldest son, yeah.
Right.
I mean, it was easy because he was, from the time he was 2, he was on a math path. But my middle son
Mm-hmm.
had no clue. He applied to a bunch of different majors. So using, that's another thing that homeschool parents can do is
Mm-hmm.
use that flexibility and freedom of your curriculum to explore. So, in the case of my middle son, this was back even when they still had a catalog for the community college. So, like,
Mm-hmm.
we literally got when I handed it to him, and he just started dog earing a bunch of classes that he was interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what he did for 11th and 12th grade. He used the community college to really explore options. What was he interested in? So, um,
Okay.
I think we have that more flexibility as homeschoolers to allow our kids to do that. We have the choice of saying, what do I want to take? Where do I want to take it? When? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, there might be restrictions financially, but there's
Mm-hmm.
just so much out there, through Coursera or MIT edX, their
Right.
cost doesn't have to be prohibitive. So I hope that's helpful.
That is, I have another quick question that I really just want to see if you could talk to these parents, talk to the parents that are out there that are thinking, oh, it's too late. I have a kid who's a senior and maybe it's like the spring semester, right, of their senior year, and they're thinking, I don't know that we can do this. Is it too late? Is there such a thing as too late?
No, I mean, that's a great question. I mean,
Hmm.
if they're targeting schools where the deadlines have passed for freshman
Right.
admissions, yeah, it's
Hmm.
too late. But I literally just worked with, or I am working with a homeschooled student in Texas who wanted to apply to a particular school, and they came to me last month.
Wow.
And so because the deadline is in May. So no,
Hmm.
it's not too late. There are a lot of schools still taking applications. You do want to, kind of explore, keep talking with your student, take a look. I think the Common App, I'm trying to think which platforms that show which colleges still have openings. I think the
Hmm.
Common
Common
Application
App
actually
does.
has
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
So, it's not too late. And then, of course, you can take a gap year and apply during your gap year if you just don't feel together.
Hmm.
Your student, now there's a caution, if they start taking community college classes after they graduate, many colleges will consider them transfer students. So
Hmm.
you would want to be really informed. But yeah, it's definitely not too late. There's a lot of schools still taking applications, and there's a gap year in applying next year.
Hmm.
So yeah, I would encourage parents just not to throw in the towel.
So you just mentioned something when you said about, college, they would consider them a college transfer. Can you speak a little bit to that
Right.
about what are the pros and cons? How does, pros and cons of I'm a high school and I'm going straight in, or I'm taking a gap year and I'm taking some college classes. Can you speak on that for families that may be interested and really want to know what that looks like and what are again, the pros and cons for that?
Right. Yeah. Super interesting. These conversations come up all the time. I'm a co-moderator for a California-based homeschool
Mhm.
Facebook group. And because we have, we have good colleges here in California, so a lot of people just, kind of just focus on transferring. So
Mhm.
pros and cons.
Mhm.
I would say a pro of applying as a freshman is you're going in with a freshman cohort. So you get the
Mhm.
full 4-year experience. You get to be with your friends. You get a chance to know your professors. You
Mhm.
get a chance to develop relationships with professors, maybe, get into those research opportunities or internship opportunities. It's a little bit harder when you're a transfer student because you're coming in, as a newbie, in your 3rd year. So there are, positives to applying as a freshman. There's also scholarships. A lot more scholarships are available for freshman students
Gotcha.
versus, transfer scholarships. Now, this is not a one size fits all thing. Like when my son transferred to Cal State Fullerton, he got a full tuition scholarship as a cello performance major because, that's what they had for,
Mhm.
really talented musicians. So those are pluses of freshmen. Pluses of transfer, a lot of people are cost conscious and they don't want to maybe pay 2 years of, tuition.
Mhm.
So starting off at the community college here in California, there's some ways where it's actually free if you're, on a certain path. So financially, it might make more sense. Kids maybe aren't ready. They don't know what they want to study. They need a little more time to explore at the community college. So that's an advantage. I would say the myth around that, at least here in California,
Mhm.
is that transferring is somehow easier than freshmen, and I actually don't think that's the case. As a freshman, there are certain classes you're going to take, right? Your 4 years of English, 4 years of
Mhm.
math, et cetera, et cetera. But the way you check those boxes is pretty, it's pretty open to, an individual plan.
Mhm.
When you're a transfer student, you not only do you have to take specific GEs, but also specific requirements for your major.
Mhm.
And it's going to be different at like every school you apply to. So when I work with transfer students, like we've got mega spreadsheets going, okay, this what school wants, this is what this school wants, and this school
Mhm.
wants. So transferring is not as easy as people think
I
because you
see.
have a lot more very specific boxes you need to check. So that's a downside. So I
It's
hope
good to
that's
know. Yeah,
helpful.
I think
Yeah.
that's going to be really helpful for a lot of families. Yeah.
Yeah.
Rebecca, what about extracurriculars? For homeschooled students, often the extracurriculars look a little bit different than a school-based applicant, right? That sort
Right.
of has school, student council or, school
Mhm.
plays or school sports or school
Mhm.
band. And for homeschoolers, of course, they're very busy, as we all know, in their communities doing really interesting things, but their extracurriculars might look a little bit different from a traditional school student. What would you say about how to position those extracurriculars and how are they viewed by admissions committees?
Right. That's such an excellent question. And, the good news is every college that I've ever spoken to, they are very much about the context of the student. So we're going back to communication, right? So whatever you didn't have available to you, they can't really count that against you. Yeah, no student council, but maybe you can go volunteer for a politician, right? You can
Mhm.
certainly do that as a homeschooler, right? So I think explaining the context, helping colleges understand what your opportunities were. I love, when I'm working with my students, I love to give the example of my older two sons in particular because they were very involved, just, extracurricularly. But certainly they made their own way. So my eldest son, he was a mathlete through the San Diego Math Circle. He was involved in the San Diego Chess Club. He was a musician involved in, multiple orchestras. He was a baseball player, local little league, and then on an AAU team. He did some research at San Diego State through just a series of events. He did math competitions, physics competitions. So nothing restricted him. Now we live in a large city. Obviously, if you're coming from a rural, area where there are fewer opportunities, that's important context to let colleges know.
Mhm.
This year I worked with a student from rural Mississippi, and there were certain opportunities and a lack of opportunities, and that was really important for us to be able to communicate that. And then, my middle son. Just a lot of music opportunities. Work is another thing. Like everybody can work. Homeschoolers, have a little more flexibility. My kids they worked as music teachers. They worked as musicians. My eldest son worked at Mathnasium for 2.5 years. So,
Mhm.
I think there is ample opportunity, even, in those more rural places, caring for siblings, caring for family members, all of that is context. So it's really important, how do you position them? I mean, obviously, if you're going for, certain majors that are really selective or certain colleges that are really selective, you're going to have to kind of up your game, as it were, in terms of making sure that you're prepared. I always tell kids don't do things for college, right? Do things that matter to you. Service is
Mm.
also it's a part of life, right? So everybody should be
I love
doing
that.
service in some way that's meaningful to them. But, more important are, your curriculum and your extracurriculars should be kind of helping you prepare to be an adult, helping you to be successful in that college transition, and, just helping you contribute to your future college, right?
I
So
love
I
that.
think thinking about it from the perspective, not of what the college wants, but, of your authentic voice, as it were, I think that's a more helpful way to view it.
I love that.
Kim, I could go on and on with multiple questions. Do you have
Yeah, I
something
mean,
else to
I
add?
love that. Yes, and actually, so I want to ask you when the mommy transcript. That's something that I get all the time from families going, "Well, yeah, but what about this mommy transcript? How is that going to be received?" Can you speak to that for families
Yeah.
that are in that position where they don't have an umbrella, they are totally doing it independent? Can you speak to them about that mommy transcript?
Right. And the homeschool transcript, it really will depend on where you're actually applying, right?
Hmm.
So, if you're applying to schools that have a higher admit rate, they're not going to be so concerned that document, dot every I and cross every T. You do want to have your classes, on a transcript. You want to make it, easy to see. When I work with families, I offer, transcripts that I've used. So it doesn't have to be any big fancy thing. If you're applying to, more selective schools, they will want to see outside coursework. So not just, quote unquote, mommy grades, right? Some of that
Hmm.
can be, all three of my kids did, self-directed learning for different
Hmm.
subjects. Like we just didn't have any fear about that because quite frankly,
Yeah.
they were subjects that they weren't that interested in. So I'm like, okay, let's do it homeschoolishly, a little more casually. But all of them did college classes, right? Or some AP tests and things like that. So I think the higher up in selectivity you go, the more important it is to actually have outside validation.
Hmm.
So if you're applying to a school that has an admit rate of 10% or something, you definitely would want some AP scores or community college classes,
Hmm.
the SAT, ACT, along with that homeschool transcript. And when I'm guiding students through the homeschool transcript, there are different models. Like with my eldest son, because he started high school and college work so early, we
Hmm.
did a transcript that was by subject, by calendar year, rather than by grade level, because it would
Oh,
have looked
wow.
weird to put like fourth grade geometry.
Right. Sure. Yeah.
But we also included course descriptions.
Hmm.
So, and it can be a little blurb. I've worked with homeschool
Hmm.
families. I'm just like, yeah, we need to trim that down from 40 pages. There is a point at which there's overkill, but I specifically remember back when my eldest son was applying, and I called Princeton because that was one of the
Hmm.
schools that he applied to. And I said, we've got like 25 pages of course descriptions, and they were sort of like, well, okay, but if you can trim that, that would be really great. So we got it down to
Yeah.
like 15 pages,
Wow.
and it was fine. He was admitted, but
Yeah.
so again, kind of the rule is the more selective you're looking at,
Hmm.
uh, the more information they want, maybe the more outside validation, accredited
Hmm.
courses. I think homeschoolers can make a mistake, particularly here in California. I've seen it of
Hmm.
like, oh, we can only do accredited courses.
I was going to ask you to
That's a,
speak on that as well. If you could
yeah,
really expound on that, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there. Like, I have to have this, it has to be accredited. Can you
right.
please speak to these families
Now
about
that
that?
is a model, and that's every,
Hmm.
I don't fault anyone because that's a model that, if that's what works best because it's easiest,
Hmm.
it's convenient, they like it, they like what they're using,
Hmm.
great. We just, again, my personal philosophy, I just came into it such a different viewpoint. I don't know,
Hmm.
maybe, being a special ed teacher, a little bit loosey goosey, but, I was an unschooler when I started and then kind
Hmm.
of morphed into self-directed learning, recognizing community college was really beneficial for
Hmm.
my eldest because by then I had three kids and he outpaced me along, when he was pretty young. So, community college was great, but we also put together, self-directed classes. He worked with tutors very unschoolishly, like when he ran out of math classes,
Hmm.
after 10th grade at the community college, we went back and used a guy named John Rosasco, who's like a great math mentor online. So
Wow.
he audited for free upper division classes at San Diego State. There was no official transcript, but the
Hmm.
professor let him audit, take the tests. He wrote a great letter for him. So,
Hmm.
I kind of that not don't take no, figure out a way forward. If it's structured, great. If it's not, that's okay too. So yeah, I think, and of course it depends on your state's requirements too,
Mm-hmm.
right? California private homeschoolers have a lot of freedom, but
Mm-hmm.
the audience that that's listening, you want to make sure you're following your state's laws,
Right, right, right. Mm-hmm.
And then, I empower you to actually, reach out, call those admissions offices. That's what they're there.
Mm-hmm.
Ask if they have a homeschool specific, admissions rep. A lot of schools actually do.
Mm-hmm.
Find out
Mm-hmm.
what they're looking for. So the more information you have, the more empowered you'll feel and more confident you'll
I love
feel.
it. Can you talk about these letters of recommendation? You touched upon it just a little bit, but can you talk a little bit more about letters of recommendation? Um, you know, helping kids navigate that,
Yeah.
what that looks like.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great question. So again, not every school
Mm-hmm.
requires them or needs them. So a lot of state schools, so I'm in California, so the University of California, no letters of recommendation, no transcripts, no counselor letter, and
Wow.
I'll talk about the counselor letter too at the same
Mm-hmm.
time.
Mm-hmm. Please, yeah.
But again, when we move into kind of the common application schools, maybe some more
Mm-hmm.
selective schools, many of them require letters of recommendation. And typically for, my students applying to the more selective schools, I'm going to usually say 2 to 3 academic
Mm-hmm.
recommendations. There are some schools like MIT that say one STEM and one humanities. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's a good balance. Anyway, if that third teacher, because there are schools that actually allow up to like 4 teachers,
Mm-hmm.
no school requires more than two. So,
Mm-hmm.
for the most selective schools, nobody requires more than two. But, if you've got a third teacher that could speak, on a different aspect of that student,
Mm-hmm.
get to know this can be, and don't think, it can be a community college teacher, it can be a co-op teacher, it can be a tutor, it can be a mentor. It does need to be in a core academic subject.
Mm-hmm.
But, like I was, in the case of my eldest son, John Rosasco was his math recommendation. The physics teacher at San Diego State was his physics. And then he had a homeschooled AP Lit teacher. And so those were his three, academic. And then there are non-academic recommendations. That can be a teacher, that can be a coach, that can be sometimes even a sibling or other family member. So on the Common App, it spells out pretty easily. You are the counselor student application, as I think you went over the last time. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah. Yeah.
getting to know those people, developing relationships with them, that's the best way to get a good letter of recommendation.
Love it.
So, Rebecca, this week, the New York Times had an article that said this is the largest cohort of high school seniors, um, and they're about to graduate from high school into college, and the implications of that for college admissions. I'd love to just sort of get your high level view, especially from your perch as a member of NACAC and WACAC and all of these professional associations. What what's happening with college admissions? What are some of the trends that you're seeing, sort of generally, not just for homeschoolers or other non-traditional students?
Yeah, I mean, they've been talking about the enrollment cliff for a while, and I don't think it's as dire. Yes, I guess, people started having less babies after this year, right? So there are going to be fewer students maybe applying to college, but I think colleges are actually really trying hard to show the general public the value of college, right? Because I think people have questioned it as costs have gone up, and is it really worth it, and is my child better off just going into a trade or something like that. So I do see that colleges are really trying hard to kind of convince the general public that college matters. Other trends, obviously the test is back. Yeah, there are still test optional schools, but just recently, I think it was the Ohio State reinstituted for next cycle. Testing is back. Case Western maybe. So definitely like every year, schools that said, no, we're going to be test optional, like Caltech, they went test option or test blind. They went test blind, and they're like, oh, we're going to hold that, no, they went back to requiring a test. So that's a big trend. I would say the other trend I see is sort of this, we talked, I don't know that you guys have touched on the Supreme Court decision of a couple summers ago where colleges can't consider race or ethnicity in admissions.
Yeah.
But I think colleges are really looking to continue with wanting a diverse class. So they're looking at it in different ways. So they're looking at like first gen and rural students, and they've a lot of schools have added a prompt about talking about your lived experience and your background.
Hmm.
So I think colleges are still committed to, diversity in their class. I just attended a Vanderbilt counselor webinar today, and that was really clear. So they changed their prompt because that's a great way for
Hmm.
them to get to know their students. So I'd say that's a big trend. What other trends? I mean, obviously there's questions about the Department of
Hmm.
Education, which I won't get into. But I think higher ed is probably doing a pretty good job of reflecting on itself and wondering, what can we do to help people see that college is still valuable. So I
Hmm.
would say that's the biggest trend I see is just having that conversation amongst themselves.
That's a good conversation.
Yeah,
And what
it
about
is.
trends with homeschoolers, Rebecca, over the years? I mean, you said you've been involved with this
Yeah,
college admissions counseling for about 13 years now in a professional
yeah.
capacity. Have you found that colleges are more open to homeschoolers? Have they always been open, but there's just now more homeschoolers applying? I
Hmm.
guess what are you seeing on the more non-traditional side in terms of college
Right.
applications?
No, yeah. So I feel like COVID sort of blew the door open for
Hmm.
colleges to reconsider, not that it was, terribly difficult. Maybe 25, 30 years ago, like, homeschooling was just this weird anomaly. And, oh, we have a few homeschool students. But I would say COVID really sort of helped colleges see that, non-traditional students are here to stay.
Hmm.
Even though many students came to homeschooling, and a lot went back into regular public schools, but a lot stayed in homeschooling.
Hmm.
So I do see more homeschool specific counselors at a lot of colleges. I would say
That's
the
good to know.
trend around me, which I kind of try to fight against it, is this idea, of like Kim mentioned, taking accredited classes, doing charter schools. I'm not opposed to them. I think they're fantastic, but I really I try to empower families to say, do what's best for your student.
Hmm.
Don't think that choosing a particular education, is going to get you brownie points. So, that's my mantra to, homeschoolers. Like I kind of miss the more, the more organic days of
Hmm.
homeschooling. It's like watching just the plethora of providers just like boom explode in the past 15 years since we started. My eldest son is 31. Like it's radically changed.
Hmm.
I kind of miss the organic stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. We're seeing
But
that.
but 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 the plus side is there is a lot more option,
Hmm.
for people looking to alternatives. I am a big proponent of, school choice. I really am a big proponent of empowering parents
Hmm.
to make the decision that's best for each individual child. So,
I love it.
yeah.
So
I love
great.
it.
So,
I love it.
Kim and I talked about all the things we didn't know and going
Hmm.
into the college admissions process with Kim with Samuel, me with Molly. Again,
Hmm.
so different than it was decades ago when we applied to college. What do you find, Rebecca, are some of the things that you would like to let parents know or
Hmm.
students know that they should be thinking about, especially again, homeschooled students and families,
Hmm.
as they approach the college admission cycle?
Yeah, I would say, at the moment, homeschooled parents maybe didn't, maybe they went to college, X number of years ago. So admit rates have really changed. So, a couple of recommendations. First, join a homeschool, group, Facebook group, local group, like
Hmm.
be with other homeschool parents. I think that's super important. Join a co-op. There's, gazillions of Facebook groups out there. I just think that that's really helpful. Second, understand a little bit more about college, admissions and college trends. Not necessarily from, I heard it from a friend who heard it from a friend,
Hmm.
But, do your own research. I think research is really empowering. Parents are sometimes surprised at, oh, the admit rates are so low, or, oh, homeschoolers don't get into these particular colleges. So do your homework. I would say don't be afraid. Again, reach out, ask questions of trusted people, whether that's, someone like me or someone like you ladies, or, the admissions folks themselves. Knowledge really is power. So don't be caught off guard. Try not to do things last minute. That could be a surprise to you. Like,
Hmm.
I didn't know they needed this. Let's double check on that. Let's contact them. I didn't know they needed course descriptions, or, that, Susie had to take the SAT because she's a homeschooler, even though they don't require it for other people. So, do your homework, try to anticipate things a little bit sooner. I mean, I definitely advocate, it's not too late, but I think knowing more earlier, it can be beneficial. And then, quite frankly, policy does change too. Like, you
Hmm.
can know something earlier, and then policy can change the next year regarding, homeschoolers and, whatnot. And, that's something that we can't really control, but having an open mind, I think back when my eldest son applied to college, we didn't know anything. And so community college was his safety, and my husband still he chided me like, yeah, your expectations are a little low. But I'm like, I don't know. This is our first time around. So like, we were good with it. So every
Hmm.
every acceptance was a celebration. It's like,
Hmm.
this is great. We managed our expectations. I wrote, just in
I love
case
that.
y'all want to go over to my LinkedIn page, I wrote an article on managing
Hmm.
expectations that I send to everyone that I work with. It's just, understand the process, manage your expectations, and you'll be happy with the results. Yeah.
I love it. I had a quick question about the fact that there are so many schools that are going back and they're requiring these tests. I had a quick question about actually late SATs. Um, if How late is too late for that SAT, or is it ever too late to take that SAT again? Because we've got some folks in their senior year that
Right.
are taking it a little
Right.
late and like, I think I want to take it again.
Right. So yeah,
Okay.
no, great
Hmm.
question. And I would say the students that are still maybe taking it, like Florida, for instance, has something called
Hmm.
Bright Futures. It's a scholarship program,
Hmm.
and you have to get a certain benchmark, GPA, SAT score. So there are definitely Florida, homeschoolers and non-homeschoolers are probably still taking the SAT. I think you
Hmm.
can take it up to August or something like that. Late SAT, I mean, early deadlines are, let's say you're going to apply something called early action or early decision.
Yeah, that's
That's usually November
November.
1st.
Yeah, November.
And so
You're
your
done.
last SAT for that is October, right?
Hmm.
So after that,
Hmm.
regular decision, deadlines are usually end of the year. So you could take a December
Hmm.
SAT. And then, for schools that still have rolling deadlines,
Hmm.
sure, you could take a spring SAT. So it really all is, it matters in terms of the actual deadline of the
Right.
colleges
Right.
themselves. So, I'm a big spreadsheet queen.
Hmm.
So if
Hmm.
you're
Hmm.
if you're planning on going through the process, get your college list in a spreadsheet, get your data points in that spreadsheet, and
Yeah.
start filling it in so that you've got the information you need so that you're not, caught off guard. And we can't do everything perfectly, but we can prepare,
We do our best.
and that's a good start.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And you
Great.
sort of
Great.
alluded to this a little bit, Rebecca. Do you still find there are some colleges that are more or less welcoming to homeschoolers and other non-traditional students? What have you seen there?
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't even know if it's, quote unquote welcoming, but as much as there are hoops to jump through.
Hmm.
And even when we've talked to people, like, I don't know if Bard College is one that, if you're listening, Bard, this was probably 4 years ago, but I had a student who's very unschoolish and did community college, like, great student, amazing. Bard was the student's number one choice. But Bard made us do a syllabus for every single non-accredited class. Do you know
Wow.
how that parent paid me thousands of dollars to
Wow.
do this? I'm just like, so I messaged the Bard people. I said, do you know what your policy is? Like, this is not cool. And they said, oh, no, we didn't know. And we're going to change it. But then the next year I saw it was still there. And I'm like,
Wow.
gosh. And that's a school that's supposed to be kind of like, oh, oh, we're really out of the box. I'm just like,
Mhm.
wow, that is so in the box. Like, this student wants you. And there are so many other
Mhm.
schools that are just the opposite. They're like, we love homeschoolers. I'm just like,
Mhm.
golly. So there are schools, University of Richmond used to, require a lot. I don't know what their policy is today. I haven't looked this year. I didn't have any students apply. UMass, yay to Molly for getting
Mhm.
in, has that sort of like, I think, this 26 credits of community college, or you've got to give an accredited, transcript or something like that. So there are schools that have those kind of what I call, but some of those are coming down from the state. So they tell us,
Mhm.
like New York also, has some fairly onerous, for their state schools, they have some fairly onerous laws regarding, what the transcript, needs to be and stuff. So,
Mhm.
I don't know that anybody is particularly unfriendly. They just, some have antiquated, homeschool requirements they probably didn't
Yeah.
even know they need to update, and then others seem to come down from the state legislator.
Mhm.
So yeah, good question.
This has
Great.
been so great. We could go on and on,
Yeah.
Rebecca, but I'm conscious of time and of your generous insights here. I think you would say too that, homeschooling parents and other families applying to college, they certainly can do all of this alone and navigate this process independently and have great results. But for those listening who may want to work with a professional college admissions counselor, what are some of the things that they should look for, whether they're,
Mhm.
interested in contacting you or others? There are, sort of certain industry standards, things that
Right.
they should be watching for as they
Right.
look to hire someone.
No, that's such a good question. And actually, I don't have the link on the top of my head, but if you go over to IECA, Independent Educational Consultants Association, you'll see, what to look for when hiring an IEC, an independent educational consultant. They
Mhm.
have ethical standards. So, I would say first off, if you're going to hire somebody, make sure that they're a part of either HECA or IECA. Those are two industry standard, professional organizations. And also think about whether you want to work with an independent person like me. I just run my
Mhm.
own, I am me, versus a big company where you might be, working with different people. There are pros and cons. I tell my families like, if you send me an essay, I have to give you 48 hours to turn around. Like I'm me. Whereas you
Mhm.
might hire a company and they can turn that essay, review around in an hour, but you
Mhm.
might not get that hands-on touch. You might be doing group classes. So think about, what how your student, your student is going to be the one. When I work with homeschool families, everybody's involved, right? Because I'm,
Mhm.
working with the parents on their documentation, but also the students. So think about, the needs of your student, think about your needs as homeschool parents. Think about, what types of services you need, whether it's just curriculum support, whether you want the college application support, whether you want support for activities or summer.
Mhm.
So just begin and then interview. That's usually my biggest, recommendation. Even if somebody comes to me, I'm like, I hope you're interviewing a couple of other people, because we're all really different, which is cool, which is
Mhm.
great. Like we run our businesses differently. We all have different personalities, and this particular student may be a good fit for me, or not good fit for me, but a good fit for somebody else. So I say always, ECA is a great organization to just go over to their website and, check out all their resources. So yeah, good question.
Kim, any last questions from you
Um,
for Rebecca? Again, we could go on and on.
Yeah, I would just, as a parent, I would love for you just to speak to the parents that are out there that are thinking through this process. If you could
Yeah.
just give them like one snippet of a message that can really encourage them, or what would you want to say to them?
For homeschool parents,
Hmm.
I really think that you can do it. If this is what's best for your child or children, you can do it. The second thing is don't be afraid to change if it's not working, right? If it's whether it's a curriculum, whether it's a type of homeschooling, whether it's an educational setting, you really have the power to make those decisions. And, don't operate out of fear. Maybe operate out of love for your kids and wanting to do right by them. And then maybe don't do it in a vacuum. Get yourself into a community where you can feel supported and encouraged, because it's worth it. Having gone through it with three kids, very different kids. I can't say it was all, daisies and roses, but I don't regret it. And I love, being a homeschool parent is just, the best job I ever had.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
I
you.
love that.
Yeah.
And Rebecca, your website is orlowskiconsulting.com. We'll put a link to that in the show notes as well for anyone who wants to reach out to you. And I'm just so thrilled that we were able to have this conversation. And as Kim and I have been talking along this series, just giving hope and encouragement to homeschooling families and students that they can go on to college, they can
Yeah.
go on to alternatives to college, different career
Mhm.
paths to adulthood, and have a truly meaningful experience that they don't have to stop at eighth grade. That high school homeschooling is possible and can be extremely fulfilling and successful. So
Yeah.
thank you,
Thank
Rebecca and
Thank
you.
you,
Kim, for
Rebecca.
being
Thank you
here
for having
again.
us,
Really appreciate
Carrie.
it.
Thank you so
So
much.
good. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you.